My guests this week are Sally Timms and Jon Langford of the Mekons. The band has spoken that the Mekons were formed in Leeds in the UK long, long ago, in the olden days of Yeet-punk, and that the good ship Mekon has sailed the 7 seas of musical mishaps, releasing 40 or 50 albums and countless singles on one fantastic record label after another. The Mekons still maintain a collective approach to their art, and they are not beholden to the whims and niceties of fashion, or even nice-sounding tunes. Back in the day, the personal is politic was their motto, and while that still holds true, it morphed into the political is political. And now, along with everyone else, it's organize and resist. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Sally Timms and Jon Langford. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you? How are you today?
I'm vibrating. I'm such a fan. I mean, I first heard the Mekons on a mixtape where somebody didn't put what it was, which seems like the best way to discover your band. I'm just really honored you're here. And one of the few things that I took from the video store when I closed it, because I just didn't want to take the store with me, was this film here, Revenge of the Mekons.
Oh, yeah.
Such an incredible documentary for people who are fans already or don't know who the Mekons are. How did you get hooked up with Joe Angio? Is that his name? Joe Angio?
Joe Angio. Well, he asked us, he approached us to make the documentary, and
we vetted him.
I bet.
There were very divergent feelings on doing it. I have to admit, I was a real naysayer, because I felt like there are a million, and especially at that point, it just seemed like rather than like now everyone's writing a book. Well, then it was everyone's having a documentary made about them, and I just felt like they're a dime a dozen, and I was very anti the whole thing when we first started, and so there were a lot of mixed feelings about going ahead and doing it. It's a strange thing to have someone come and say they want to make a film about your band's existence, because how's that even going to work in a 2-hour format? And so it's interesting to me that in the end I made peace with it, but at first I was one of the people who really was like, why?
I was totally gung-ho. I was desperate to be on the big screen.
Yes, John's just a fame whore. Yeah. So that's the problem. I'm the opposite.
What I said when we started was just, it'll be all right. Just don't say anything you don't want to be in the movie.
Right.
But then people said things that they didn't want to be in the movie. So it was interesting. It was an interesting process. I think it was not actually as a thing for the band. It was useful.
I agree with that. I think it probably did give people an overview, albeit I don't know. How do you view what you've done in your own life? It's like anything. If someone walked up to you and said, I want to make a documentary about you, it's like, well, how do you summon up all those things? And there's so much time that's gone on in the course of the band,
And it's been 13 years since it came out. I mean, you've put out like 6 or 7 records in the meantime. It's like it moves on. So it's just a snapshot and it stops. And then it's when like,
it came out, it was funny because I thought, God, don't we look old? Now when I see it, it's like, God, don't we look young?
Young, yeah, I know.
Well, they can always cut away to, you guys jumping around in the Memphis, Egypt music video.
Yes, that's really, really young.
Oh my God. Anytime I need a boost, I put on that damn video. I love it so much. I love nothing more than watching the Mekons jump around. It's just,
There's less jumping around now.
Well, of course. I'm right there with you.
John hasn't. He's still leaping. But I had to find out ways of doing things with my arms rather than my legs because I have terrible knee arthritis, and jumping is way out of my remit now as far as activity is concerned.
Right. You just have to raise your arms up and kind of make the gesture.
The excellent semaphore gesture. She does the entire lyrics in semaphore while we're
right. Well, the documentary is interesting too because there seems to be like certain things that follow the band that I just you have so much mythology, you know, whether it's like Dick Taylor walking his amp up on stage and plugging in. One of the things that I just never, it just was always strange to me was, and it happens a lot in the film where a lot of talking heads, a lot of critics, a lot of other musicians are like, oh yeah, they just couldn't play. And I was like, what? Have you heard these records? Like, how can you do like Millionaire, you know, Hello Cruel World?
That was a different band. Those were different bands.
But at the same time, like but you did that drum roll on Where Were You, right, John?
That was me, yeah.
That is an insanely incredible drum fill. Like it just makes me want to rip the walls apart. And it's like it's really skilled in a way, even if it's innocent. I love it. And so I was always thought that was kind of a weird tag.
No, I would say that I had a bit of interest in being in a band. None of the other people really ever thought of being in a band. So the original Mekons, it was just like, let's form a band because none of us can play any instruments. And then they got me in because I had a drum kit, and obviously in punk rock days you needed a drummer. You know, but it was the Gang of Four could play, but literally it was trying to piece together something that could work, and we could be involved in this exciting new punk rock scene without having any obvious musical skills. But I really liked it because I hated music in the mid-70s so much because it was just that jazz fusion virtuosity and prog rock, elves and wizards and that I didn't really relate to me. I liked first music I liked was T-Rex, and I thought that was real simple.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
I wanted something. I wanted my own like rock and roll, basically. And when punk came, it was just we were like ripe for it. Everyone was bored and thought music was kind of on person out of reach.
Yeah, removed actually as well. Yeah. You know, it wasn't. I suppose you had garage bands in like the 60s, but you that had kind of vanished, and the idea of just going and seeing people play in a small club just didn't seem like that was the way that music was consumed, and so punk kind of turned that on its head.
Yeah, you could have a favorite band suddenly. I always wanted to have a favorite band I could go and follow and see. And all the bands just played like once every 18 months when they had a new album out. Even bands I liked.
Right.
Kind of so boring. And suddenly, you know, I think the Buzzcocks, because they were in the north of England, were much bigger influence on us than like the Clash or the Sex Pistols. The Buzzcocks, we could sort of see them doing it themselves. And we could go and see them play on the Fall as well. I used to go and see, I must have seen the Fall play about, 20 times, well, before them, not 20 times, but a lot, before the Mekons even had a record out.
Yeah.
You could go and see the Fall, they'd just be playing everywhere. So.
I was sure that I saw Joy Division when they were Warsaw, but I was wrong. But I went to the Russell Club and Pete was playing, the Tiller Boys were playing, and Joy Division, I think, were doing their first show opening for them. So there was so much going on, and it was relatively small scale for a lot of it, And
it was like opening the door. There was a door open where a lot of people, like Mekons, it was not unique what we were doing. There was a lot of people were like, kind of never thought they could be in a proper band.
Yeah.
Never thought they could. And suddenly it was like, oh.
Everyone was in a band. Everybody in Leeds was in a band.
And up in the north of England, they were all weird bands as well. It wasn't like there was. I didn't know many bands that were straight punk rock.
Right.
The Gang of Four definitely weren't a punk rock band. The Human League in Sheffield and Cabaret Voltaire in Sheffield, they were doing this electronic thing. That wasn't the Buzzcocks. I mean,
the whole match, like everything.
The Fall was like crowd rock kind of derived.
Everything had a regional accent in a weird way. So the stuff outside of London, or maybe because London was so dominant with the bigger bands, you kind of didn't think so much about all the people who were percolating underneath. But in the regions, it was very clear that there was just a regional voice for all those cities. So everything was different in the way that people were approaching how to play.
With hindsight, I think in the provinces, we provincial people misunderstood the messages coming out of London. We thought it was like a revolution. Well, actually, now looking back on it, it was just in London. It was kind of just the next phase of fashion and the music business. You know, the Clash was signed to CBS really early on. It was just a changing of the guards and all of the Clash. I love the Clash, but I think we misunderstood it. We really thought it was the revolution, and you could just, we had this kind of, we were pumped up with hope that you could just do whatever you wanted. And it was just a very different atmosphere. Most of the interesting stuff that I listen to now is from the North or Scotland or even some Welsh bands. You know?
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it's fascinating that Bob Last, from Scotland put out your first record. And I had the author of Postcards from Scotland on, and just the stories of Bob. I can't even imagine what a deal like with him would have been. I'm sure it was just so seat of the pants. But I love that he was the first one to be like, you want to put out a record?
That was our first gig. He suggested it. We didn't want to put out a record. We had a manifesto at the time that said we will never make a record.
That lasted.
It lasted till the end of the first gig when somebody asked us to make a record. And we went, oh, let's make a record.
Well, I like the story. I didn't really know that the Gang of Four were really mad because the Mekons used to record on their or used to rehearse on their equipment when they went to the pub. And so they were the ones who were really working it, but they didn't have a record deal for ages.
Yes.
And the Mekons just play their first show. And
Roz, our bass player, was in tears telling him that you shouldn't sign us, you should sign the Gang of Four. They're going to be really big. And he was going, they're a proper band. And he was going, I don't want a proper band.
In John King's book, he says, I'm envious of the Mekons who like each other, get on well, and forgive each other's foibles, unlike us. It's like already in the film, there's also kind of this hinging on what John just said. Another mantra in the film is the Mekons are just unlucky. You're on stage when someone in the audience says, your show's been canceled. You're finding about things in real time.
That was lucky for the documentary.
Yeah, I was going to say that was one of the things.
Happened.
That was one of the things that bummed me out because
totally.
Joe was filming during this weird tour where we got booked by a new agent, and because he was influential, he'd managed to, we had bigger shows.
Right.
But then they all started canceling on us, and we were like, well, why are you letting them cancel? And it was really bizarre because that has literally never happened. And so I don't like the lovable losers kind of thing. Not that I don't, if we are lovable losers, fine. But, it's always been the kind of motif, like, oh, they signed to A&M, it all went wrong, their label issues. That was always kind of to me, kind of cheap journalism, because what band of any who's had any longevity hasn't had a bad major label experience? It's like, it just is the way it is. That is the nature of the business. Or even a bad indie label. That goes wrong actually in some ways more often.
I prefer the major label.
Yeah, because at least there's money.
It's kind of impersonal, and you're just bashing your head against the corporate door rather than people that you like betraying you and stabbing you in the back.
It's refreshing to hear you say that, because that kind of bugged me in the documentary, because I was like, no, they're so lucky they found each other. Like, they know how to work together. They come in, they make art and music collaboratively just from the moment they enter a room together. It's not pre-planned.
And the other thing I will say is we had plenty of arguments on that in the course of that. And of course, there are tons of arguments in this band. It's not like everyone gets in a row. It's like, hey, we're together again. Sometimes, but not always. And we had arguments during Joe filming, and he actually wanted us, once he didn't have his camera, and we had a big argument discussion in a pub, and he asked if we would restage that for the documentary. We're like, No, absolutely not. We're not going to, because the thing is, we're not going to show him part of the mechanism of this band because that's private. And it's like people don't need to know that. And maybe there are bands who allow that to happen. I suppose you've got Metallica who, take the documentary makers to their therapy sessions, but that's different and all fine. I suppose that's reasonable too, but that's not us. So it's far more than that experience, and so my feeling is the interesting thing about us, aside from I think we've made some good records and kept, is that we are very flexible in the way that we view our existence. So we can do other things. And that actually is why Trances appeals to me, because it tells that story too of like, you are a musician, but you're not there to necessarily make loads of money, sell loads of records, and people think you're God. That is the antithesis of what we are. And that's why I think we've been able to keep going this long. And that's the success, that we can keep going, because the way we view ourselves in the world is as this is something we do and we put it out there. And if we can't do it a certain way, then we'll do it another way. And the thing that I liked about that, the things that happened with those cancelled shows, where we were in the van being told the gigs were getting cancelled and calling around trying to find other gigs. It wasn't like, oh God, let's just split up. This is just a waste of our time. And have we been at that point in times? Yes, of course we have. And then we just go away and regroup for a while and don't speak to each other for months and months on end, and then go, yeah, maybe it's time to do this again. Let's see if it's any different. The definition of madness.
Watching that film, there's a lot of parallel. It struck me.
The parallels, yeah.
There's some weird parallels.
I know.
Punk rock was year zero, and we thought we were inventing the wheel, and we did not see ourselves as part of a broader tradition.
Right.
We didn't know much about.
Oh, wow. Sorry, we've just been brought some food by the lovely Kelly. I don't know what it is. Crumpets.
Awesome.
But
oh my God, I'm so jealous.
When we did the thing with Virgin, we were kind of we had a bunch of songs we'd been playing around live for 3 years by the time we came to record that album, and we were bored out of our minds. So we were on a major label recording at Richard Branson's mansion in the Oxfordshire countryside because it was cheaper for them to put us there. Because then they could bill us. They had no one in there that week, so they could make money out of it and bill us. They could pay themselves, but make us, put us in debt for that. It was kind of ludicrous, and we were so bored. And then the next thing we did after we'd made that album, and the album didn't really, kind of flopped compared to how the singles had done before that. The first thing we did was look in the yellow pages for a studio to go and do some demos to try and make something different. And the idea was just to work entirely differently. And for some reason, we went to Alan, at a studio called Leader Sound, which our manager found, had no idea of the history of it. And this guy was like, Bill Leader, it's like the Alan Lomax of British folk music. And with him and another guy that worked with him, who'd actually worked with the Sex Pistols, a guy called John Gill, they kind of sat us down and they explained like the history of music to us.
Right.
It was this incredible education when we learned about, functional music, some folk music, and how you're just part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years. We were like, what? And it became apparent that, it wasn't year zero. We weren't inventing the wheel, and we could think about it in totally different terms. And I was just getting that from those guys in that film.
Yeah, you've rediscovered the wheel.
Yeah, but
the wheel had been lost.
They're taking like, this tradition, but then doing something really immediate and up to, and that's the great thing about folk traditions or oral traditions. You can, you can bring them up to date really easily. It always meets with resistance, and people think it's sacrilege and it's wrong.
Well, yeah, and it's amazing. Even, so we're talking about the film that you brought to my attention, Trances, by Ahmed El Manouni, about the band Nass El Ghiwane. I had come across this at the video store because Martin Scorsese had restored it. It was one of the first films it was the first film he restored as part of his World Cinema Project. And he had seen it on late night cable on a TV show called Night Flight that used to show like new wave theater and everything. And so having access to it for the first time at the store was incredible. But it is so funny. There are so many parallels, even though they're in another country. The band dynamics are funny. You got the cool one, the goofball, the ringer, the musical guy who just knows, they're like, he knows how to play, we don't. And the film is so lovely because they just let them do their thing and their personalities come out even beyond the power of their music.
I love the way that film is made. It is so beautifully made. It looks beautiful. It allows the songs to tell the story. And then it doesn't give you biography at all. It is completely the opposite. It's a wash of images. And then...
And the sound and the excitement of what they're doing is that, I mean, bits in it which are like, it's almost too much. It's almost like, I can't imagine being in a room with these people doing this. It would be like, it sounds like
the crowds are wild and everyone's just going for it, which reminds me, and a lot of men actually, possibly because Moroccan society, men are more likely to go to those shows, but just that's what it's like with a lot of punk rock shows too. It's a lot of men, a lot of young men just letting off steam. And so you see the audience there, but they're singing these songs that are overtly political, but also incredibly poetic. And since they all came from theatre, I think obviously the director worked very closely with them and said, but we'll stage these conversations that are almost like a little excerpt from a play where they act out their own characters and tell that story. And I love that. I think that the way that movie is made is so beautiful. It's so beautifully filmed and put together. And the only other film about music that I can think of, and I haven't seen everything, but in contemporary documentary movie making is Dream of Life, the Patti Smith movie, which I thought was incredible. And another one where it's very lyrical. You know, it's not really telling a story. It's a lot of her poetry and clearly made very strongly in conjunction with the artist, as opposed to someone coming and going, well, here's a bunch of frigging talking heads who are all going, it's always the same sodding people.
Right.
I mean, to be honest, Fred, my ex-husband, is in so many music documentaries talking about, it's like, oh God, there's Fred again. It's like,
it's so
it's
true.
always, so it's pretty funny.
Show I put on, he's saying, oh God, he's Fred.
He loves music, but it's like, it's not really a diss on him. It's more like, why do you have to have that? Or Dave Grohl, it's got to be Dave Grohl or the guy from Hold Steady. You know, it's like, it's
Dave Grohl, the mayor of rock and roll. He has to be.
You know, and they're not.
Henry Rollins have to be in every documentary about punk rock.
And so
every documentary about roots music has to have Bono in it.
Right. Oh my God.
And so there's this format that has just become very unimaginative, in my opinion, about how you render a story.
Yeah.
And the story in Trances is so beautifully done because you watch that movie and you know them at the end, but they haven't really divulged that much about themselves, but you know what's going on. And so I just think the filmmaking is so mature and beautiful. And then the music is just incredible. And they take all these elements from, you know, Moroccan life and just street musicians, people falling in and out of them playing, you know, or them, you know, one of the guys working is he's a woodworker and he just starts playing music with this guy playing flute who wanders by.
I love that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then the stuff that, you know, the stuff they say about, I'm a musician, why do I need to know about the law? You know, because they're getting some shitty deal and they have to, you know, they're getting pirated. And I just thought, well, you do, unfortunately, because you're in the business. So either you hire someone or you have to know what you're doing. But that is the history of music once it became that kind of industry. And I'm sure prior to music being recorded and sold, you know, people would be turning up to their gigs and not getting paid. And how do you get the money out of people? So there's always this issue with how you deal with the business side of music, which has affected every single person who's ever, got to a certain stage, even a marginally low stage of having their music recorded or being paid to do it. So I just think it's a beautiful movie on so many levels.
Yeah, and Omar Saeed, who's one of the musicians in the film, later said he was really nervous about having a documentary made about them, but was really happy about several things. One is, he said most music documentaries focus on people's hands playing, and this was their faces, which I think is such a cool choice, because you see them concentrating so hard, like looking at each other. They're playing
Right.
They're playing instruments that are not electric, so they're playing with a little mic under them to thousands of people who are freaking out. And I do love at the beginning of the film, it's like 2 minutes of just audience footage before you even get to the band, and it's just electrifying. And then just the things where, like, one of the best lyrics ever is one of theirs where they say, "Listen to me, good people, the rich man has died." And I'm like, that's one of the greatest lines ever. That should be in almost every song, And I wanted to ask, because you have Horrible coming out with Tony
Mamona, Perubu's bass player,
Yeah, so you make this album, Horror, which is incredible. And I'm jumping all over the place, but the line here, and Before the Ice Age, my surplus value stolen by a Victorian vampire, sucking out my cold, cold heart, the walls of myself crashing quietly in the transistor dark, slimy fingers on the glass touch screen. I fucking love that. Like, so in terms of like finding the tonality of something like a song like Before the Ice Age, or even War Economy, where you decide to put in a bubblegum chorus like la 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 la, and then I'm assuming that's John in the background and like going ah. So how do you come together on all these elements to make music still?
That is just the nature of you're in a band. It's like some things are happy accidents.
Oh, it's so great. But I mean, I have been in bands, but I do feel like it's very micromanaged, and maybe it's just the illusion of my mindset of the Mekons just being like, everybody goes, that's the greatest idea ever, put it on. And I'm sure that's not the way it is.
It isn't. I don't know how things just happen. And a lot of the time now with digital, you can record a lot of stuff and then pull it out. So I don't know.
Right. We've always worked from the point of view of putting a lot of stuff down and then stripping it back.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, that was from the very beginning, when we weren't like virtuosos. We never had guitar solos. We'd have a little clockwork toy where everyone was playing a part.
Right.
Then he'd drop a bit out. And the Gang of Four did the same thing. We talked about it. It was a direct influence of like dub reggae and stuff like that. But the reason we did it with Tony, I think, looking back on it, there was so much stuff. There was 8 people sitting in a studio in Valencia, and we had a take, but we didn't really listen back to it. We go, oh, that's good. But there'd be like people playing weird little keyboard parts and people playing instruments they weren't used to. Like when we went to the Bill Leader studio, we definitely had people not playing what they normally play. And then there was all these kind of avenues to make the choice for what was best for the song. Then you were kind of excluding all these kind of weird things that just kind of worked, that were really interesting. So I think to let Tony just go with it blind and just have the files and say, you mix it, no instructions, make it sound, it's called horror, make it sound really extreme, make it sound horrible. He ran with that,
Yeah, he started it. It's actually another happy accident in a way, because we had finished, or at least pretty much finished, everything that needed mixing, and then Dave, who has mixed our records many, many times and is now our bass player, but he actually suddenly had to cancel the mixing session for the record, and we were just like, oh my God, it had already waited a year. And so there was kind of a panic, and we thought, well, we need to do something, because there was no date when he could get back online. And so we approached Tony and said, would you do something with all this stuff? And, our remit was just make it sound horrible and really extreme. And so he started off and did about 4 or 5 of the tracks. He was just sending them to us one at a time. And, half the band listened to it and half the band hated it and half the band really liked it. And so
it was an accident that Tony did it, because my son was interning at his studio. The first thing was, let's get Tommy to mix it. Let's have a 24-year-old, a 22-year-old at the time. Let's have him just like see what he thinks. So him and Tony started it. But of course, being 22, he immediately moved to LA or something,
Right.
And then, so Tony was constructing all this stuff and he'd never heard any kind of demos of anything. So he was finding all these pieces. And then we had told him to make it sound really, really extreme. Well, for some people in the band, it was a leap too far on the extreme level. And so it kind of like sat there for a while. And then Dave came back and said, well, I can mix it now. So
okay.
They went for it with like, these are the songs, let's put everything in service of the song.
Right.
Sure.
And that's one way of doing it.
Right. And so he finished that and that became Horror, and that came out. And we still had these tracks by Tony sitting around. And so we went back to Fire and said, look, let's make it into something. And so he finished it all. And we got Benji Webb to toast on Mud Crawlers, which seemed appropriate because we were going into much more like dubby areas of the mixes. And John will tell you more about Benji. That makes sense. But
well, he was number 1 in the charts a couple of weeks ago in England. His band Skinder.
Yeah.
He's just this old mate of ours he lives down by Newport Docks, and that song Mud Crawlers was about incidents that happened to immigrants trying to get into Great Britain, 100 and 200 years ago. So it was an interesting, for us, it was a very interesting thing
to have him do that, and the connections that he had.
He had the lyrics, but he chose to just,
he riffed on them.
He just, that's what a toaster does. So now as we decided it was like a dub album, to have someone toasting on it.
In the documentary, they say it, every new album tends to be your favorite one. And it's kind of true. You guys have a magic in terms of when it comes out, it just fits my headspace at the time. Right. And Sally, you mentioned in the film Trances, there's a point where he's working at the wood shop and he starts jamming with a street musician on the flute.
Right.
And again, in the documentary, I did not know much about the English folk thing that was, introduced to you when you went in to record, but also showing up in Chicago and meeting the Sundowners and that language of just get up on stage. We're going to teach you. I don't know. I mean, can you break that down? Because it's like, to me, for someone in the Pacific Northwest, to be like, wait, the Sundowners are Chicago? Like, it fractures my head.
The Sundowners are like the kind of part of the hangover of the WLS Barn Dance, which was the biggest country radio show in the country. And the guy who set that up went to Nashville and set up the Grand Ole Opry. But Gene Autry was the big star that came out of that. And it became a magnet. I mean, there was a great migration, as we all know about the great migrations from the south up to the north. But mostly talk about that in sense of the blues tradition, because that Chicago is known as a blues town, but right. It's not thought of now as a country music town. But it was the center of country music for quite a while, because all the Appalachian people came up here, and the Sundowners they came up. They were all from the south, and they came up to work and try and be musicians. And they had a club for, I think, 36 years. And they played every night, 5 nights a week. Every night. We stumbled in there. Somebody took us to a Western wear store in the afternoon, and they took us down to Sunday, and we were all dressed up, and they couldn't believe their eyes. Were going, "Oh, looks like we got a band here." We didn't realize they were just desperate for anyone to come in and get up on stage, because they were playing for like 6 hours a night.
Yeah, they wanted some variety. So, I mean, I got up and sang. I have such vague recollection of it because that's the interesting thing that I think for us as being, Limeys in America, or any visitors, because to us that would seem normal, like, oh, you go to Chicago and there's a country bar and there's some musicians playing country music and you get up on stage and sing with them, because that's very American. And it reminds me of a story where we took the X, who are a Dutch anarchist band, to a club in Chicago called Carol's Pub, which is another leftover, which is mutated, but that used to have like a backing band, and it was a really rough club. And it was a country music club on the north side, still there, but it's a little different now.
It's nicer.
It's nicer. But it was rough. And we brought
less lights,
and we brought the X there, and it was pretty wild back then. And I think, didn't you have to step over a pool of blood to get in or something?
Some guy had stabbed his drinking buddy 7 times, and there was a pool of blood outside the police car, and some tape that was blowing in the wind, and we just walked through it. And this policewoman go, "Get out! This is a crime scene. What are you doing? Get out of there!" And I was like, "Oh God, this is human blood."
And then we went into
the guy never pressed charges.
But we went into the bar and we were drinking, and they were totally unfazed, because I think for us as outsiders, not that I am an outsider any longer, but they were, that is how America must be, right? You just walk into a bar and someone's just stabbed someone and they're playing country music, and it's so anomalous because that actually isn't what Chicago is like, but for them it was that. And so I think it's just very strange that somehow, I mean, it's like anything. There's histories that are told and there are histories that are not told. And so many histories are not told. And that's what I didn't really like about music documentaries, that kind of shapes the history where that isn't the history. The history is so much more complex and so many things. What about all the omissions? So when you have, like for us, the folk music, we knew nothing about English folk music, but it was there all the time because it's not a story that's told. There are only certain stories that are told, and then it becomes easy for people, rather like our history, to retell the same story. Oh, messed around by major labels, this, that, and the other, the lovable losers, they're always in trouble with everything. Whereas to me, our experience is kind of the opposite,
making these amazing connections and finding discovering stuff. And it's like for me, like it's kind of almost like little tiny pivotal moments in time where you could go one way, you could go the other. The fact that I went to Leeds in 1976 and the first people I met would become the lead singers in the Mekons, the class with Tom and Roz. That wasn't no one had any control over that, but the time was exactly right to do that.
Right.
The fact we walked into the Sundowners place that night and they got us up on stage, and I was so embarrassed that we couldn't actually play a song with them, and they were like, "It's fine." And the fact that we got Bill Leader's number at the Yellow Pages, not knowing that he was the key person in this entire world.
One would think there's fate, but it's not really like that. But it kind of is. It's our fate.
But it is charmed and luck, or whatever you want to say, in a way that, like, I just thought it was funny in the documentary. You're right. It just has a sheen on it of, like you said, the lovable losers. But I'm like, I mean, every band has these horrible times and stories.
Yeah, of course. That becomes the narrative for us because that's how it's been presented over and over again, which is how we learn history, that it's just a chosen narrative. But what about everything else? And that is the thing I love about Trances. It's such an intellectual movie because it doesn't do that. It sets itself outside of time, and it just allows you to watch a version of events, but you don't come away thinking that you know something, but you don't necessarily know a specific narrative.
And at no point does Mick Jagger appear in it.
Right.
Or Fred Armisen.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one talking head, and it's an academic, I think,
Yes.
or a journalist, I don't know, but only one. And I think, Martin Scorsese, his quote was that band was the Rolling Stones of Africa. And Martin, who introduced me to this movie, said he's incorrect. They are the Clash of Africa. And I thought that's a much more real comparison, because
what the Clash did.
Yeah, they're far more political and like varied, so if you're going to compare them to anyone,
I said earlier about I like the Clash. What I like about the Clash was, interestingly enough, that's where my hometown is, where Joe Strummer first heard people toasting in a Barbadian restaurant, and it's a dock town where the records used to come in with the banana boats. And that's where Benji Webb lives, and that's how he ended up singing on this record, because he's from there. But the Clash, all that pub rock stuff that was going on before, is basically, it sounds exciting, and it's like pre-punk and even early punk. It sounds exciting, but the Clash made the leap of understanding that what was going on in Britain at the time and making songs about solidarity with the black youth who were oppressed, and actually digging into that culture of that reggae music, which we loved as well, and was the soundtrack to punk rock, really. Before punk rock had any records, every club played reggae music. It was a very, we did gigs with the Ruts and Misty and Roots, which is a kind of white rock band, a black kind of reggae collective.
UK.
UK and British
reggae.
British reggae bands had a really tough time. They weren't taken seriously by their own community. They had a really hard time. So punk really kind of helped them as well, because they found an audience. Bands like, not so much UB40 maybe, but bands like Steel Pulse,
sure,
and Misty and Roots.
Oh, speaking of, I just have a quick aside. Do you know the film Urgh A Music War?
Yes. We were meant to
be
in
okay.
So we filmed. Our publishers at Virgin wouldn't give them a deal.
What?
So the Mekons, they wanted a deal, and they said on the publishing, and the Virgin Records wouldn't give them a deal on the publishing. We filmed at the Rainbow with Steel Pulse and the Gang of Four, and we are not in it.
You were filmed.
We were filmed,
but they just wouldn't come to a deal on the publishing. So yet again, a lovable loser.
No, but I have the poster, and I'm like, this is, and I think was Au Pairs on it too.
Yeah, the gig we did, it was at the Rainbow in Finsbury Park, and it was end of September 1980.
Wow.
We just come back from a pretty traumatic tour of Europe.
Yeah, I have a side podcast where I've been talking to, like, Hugo came on, Leslie came on, Stan from Wall of Voodoo, people who were in Urgh, to talk about that movie and where they were at the time. Wow. And I was like, I'm so glad you said Steel Pulse, because also I was like, I gotta ask. Oh my God, wow.
I saw Steel Pulse a number of times, and Oswald were another really good band.
I remember Oswald, absolutely.
Yeah. But the best for me was Misty and Roots, and I still listen to them. I listened to them last night in the car. It's just, they got an astonishing live album called Live at the County Eurovision or something. That sound of British reggae. Yeah, it's like so hard. It's so urban. It's nothing to do with frat boys drinking umbrella cocktails.
Right, totally. Yeah.
It's tough stuff, and that's the reggae we kind of grew up with,
Another thing I love about Trances is that in the movie, I like that you see them, like, they're so comfortable that one of them can kind of bother the other one with humor. Like, he's like, you don't take me seriously. He just jets off, and they're just kind of laughing. It's like a really interesting, it's a band, you know what I mean, of personalities.
Right.
And there's that point in the film where the director asks them, if the band didn't exist, where would you be? And all of them are like, oh, I just do something else. They were just so matter of fact. They're like, I would just find another trade. I don't want to be doing this when I'm 50 or 60.
Well, that's like Spinal Tap. I'd work in a chateau shop.
Right.
What size do you take? Do you wear black? I think I could do that.
But it's
Well, except that you couldn't.
No,
Really.
he runs a cheese shop in the lake,
right.
and all his customers are dying of heart attacks because they
Eat so much cheese. Yeah, and I think that's another reference there. They're so pragmatic about it. It's like, I'm not doing something mystical, even though it is in so many ways, but they're just the conduits for that. They play music, but it's not outside of, it doesn't make them better than other people. The whole rock industry in the West is geared to elevating people so that you can worship them and then buy their product, as opposed to just people who go out and play and bring something to the people who came to attend, and there's so much wound up in just the beauty of the lyrics and just uniting people, and on a smaller scale, because we're nowhere near as well known as them.
We've always gravitated to that. Our agent's pissed off with us now because we wanted to play smaller places. Because we sold out bigger places last year, and it's like, it'd be nicer just to play smaller places.
Well, also, I don't think
the experience is nicer for us.
It is nicer for us, but actually, to be honest, we did smaller places too, because we just did a big tour last year. When you're an older band, as my friend Amy said to me once, if you want to make more money and have more people there, play less, because older people aren't going to come and see you necessarily every 3 months. It's like, I wouldn't do it. So we wanted to do just a more intimate show, because we'd done the big tour, but we still we wanted to play once more in the US.
But that is the direction of the band now, I think, is
it's more intimate.
To bringing it into spaces that aren't to do with the music business.
Yeah, I agree with that.
To get out of that, it's like there's no advantage to us to be slogging away playing a medley of our greatest hit.
Well, you've always done that. I mean, you work with Kathy Acker on the pirate play. You worked with
doing a version of that in LA. Apparently it's being revived.
What? Kathleen Hanna's going to be in it.
Yeah.
That's so great. I love it. And then,
I don't know if they're going to use a hologram of Kathy. I don't know how they'll render that, but they could, because there's enough film of it, and there's definitely her voice.
Yeah.
So in the record, unfortunately, we are going to be at the same time sailing down the Mekong with Mekons on the Mekong, so we are not going to be involved. But they did ask us to be, but we can't do it because the timing doesn't work. But what we're going to say. Oh, well, yeah. And I think the idea of just, especially with the pandemic, that for Jon and me, that really broke open the way of playing, because now we do a lot of smaller shows where it's totally acoustic and just show up anywhere. And you can play anywhere. Now, we didn't used to do things like that. But
the idea of Sally singing without a microphone would have been ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's not, it's not easy, but it's definitely interesting to be able to do it that way. So once again, the flexibility of that comes back, and then you get back to the point, well, that's actually how people did used to play music. You had to work out how you're playing in a room totally acoustic, and how is it loud enough or quiet enough to allow the detail and the nuances to come through. So
we're getting into the Robert Crumb quote I read recently when he said there's been no good music since electricity came. All the good music was made before
electricity.
Electricity ruined everything. It's like,
the
idea of recorded music is kind of
there'd be no internet. That would be one good thing, although we're using it now, but still.
I do love in the documentary that Lou is, talking about Western music. He's in
Tajikistan, I think.
And he was just talking about the privilege of access. He said, like, every musician in America is so privileged. You have access to be able to travel everywhere, but you also have total access to your own recordings, archives, blues, gospel records. He's like, these people here don't have that. And I just think that is one of the special things about the documentary.
I do now see its purpose. I mean, that was initially, but Lou leads a very interesting life. Why wouldn't you?
Tajikistan filmed all that, which was kind of an amazing thing.
Because to be honest, we didn't know what Lou did.
Right.
You know, we did, but we've never seen a film.
We thought he was a spy.
It's incredible.
Don't
Him
say
building that studio, talking, just recording bands, just walk. Oh my God. And him just standing, like leaning against a wall. You're like, okay, this person deserves a 9-hour
He does.
documentary about him.
He's been everywhere, he really has. And
a lot of parallels in his background with Joe Strummer.
Mm-hmm.
He was a kind of part of that. Lou has lived in lots of different places, traveled a lot as a kid, and Justin, my mate Justin from who plays with Lou in the what they called Triaboliques, but he played with Robert Plant, and it's again someone who, like, his parents were in the diplomatic corps and they were going around the world, traveled a lot, and were exposed to a lot of crazy stuff when they were like really little. We're just listening to Radio 1 and Slade, like me, like.
Yeah, they've been world travelers since they were young, and so Lou, that was very interesting to me because I had never seen. He's told me what he does, but I'd never seen it, and so
to actually see him building a studio, that's what they were trying to do. They were using kind of British government money to arts funding to help people.
That was amazing.
What a wonderful world we used to live in.
Yeah,
I think it was a foundation. It wasn't.
Yeah, and I think it was British Council.
But then to go out there, take equipment. But then a band like the X in Holland, they started going to Ethiopia with a whole PA because there weren't any real access to PAs that much in Ethiopia, in the middle of nowhere, and they were doing these gigs. They were doing gigs behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, they are the epitome of resourcefulness. So they go to places you can't believe, but they started going to Ethiopia decades ago, taking equipment, and then they leave it. And so then it stays with the community that they've been playing in. And I think, and they don't do that with they have a bit of money possibly from the government or the whatever, but the Arts Council. But so that's a very that history of it's just being open, it doesn't have to be.
Well, they collaborated then. They brought Ethiopian musicians over and made fantastic records, their own independent record label, did tours of the States with people we'd never heard of, and it was some of the most dramatic and brilliant shows I've ever seen in my life. So there's many roads to the mountain.
Exactly.
But I love the idea of, breaking down borders and people mixing it up, and I think that's where most of the interesting music happens.
Yeah, and that is what music should be, because let's face it, there's no purity in music. It's like the whole idea is it's just a cross-fertilization of ideas, and it's like why we are kind of lucky to be able to be musicians. It's a great thing to be.
And I love that one bit in the film when it's Joan Delaney talking about, her husband coming home and saying, what blew in tonight? Oh, punk rock band. And he's like, it's just like really sweet. And I know that's probably what happened. But that guy, Kurt, his great niece is coming. We got a little pop-up thing this afternoon, and they'll all be coming down. Family members of the Sundowners will be here today. And we've become, just there's a friendship there.
It's a community, and I think that shows in the Trances movie as well. But when you blow into town, there's always people who want to talk to you. You bypass all the problematic things of when you're a tourist and you don't know anybody. You come into a town as a band and you immediately make friends, and people want to do things with you. And so you see a side of life that if you were just traveling without that experience would be much harder to find. How do you find what the people who live there do?
We used to travel to New Orleans a lot. I would go to Jazz Fest, and I loved it. And we'd wander around trying to find something that we couldn't find, just tourists. And then after Katrina, we were invited to go down there and perform some benefit shows with local musicians. And that was so fantastic. And again, it's built lasting friendships. I was just down few weeks ago in New Orleans and got to see and catch up with a bunch of the people we work with. Then it's kind of wonderful,
Yeah, in the end, we all end up kind of knowing each other. It just happens.
Right.
Like we're so connected, and I always feel like I feel so lucky in my lifetime to have been able to travel and see the world based on being an artist. I'm like, how lucky.
I know it is lucky, and yeah, and it makes you much more open to those for the most part, those experiences. So, I'm kind of glad that not that it would have happened, but being famous and big would be a real loss. You just show up somewhere and it's the same place every night. It doesn't matter what country you're in. You're in a tour bus or you're flying in, and your crew's setting up and you're just playing to a bunch of people that you'll never meet.
Well, we've had those experiences. I did that first time I came to the States. It was only in Chicago that we stayed with friends rather than staying in hotels and going to clubs, radio stations, and just being buffeted around.
Right.
And not being able to catch your breath. Just people saying, "What was LA like? You went to LA? Oh, it was an airport,
right?
A taxi, a dressing room, a hotel room, and another airport.
Right.
That's all I remember. I don't know. I didn't see anything. And it was now I think we're very conscious of
time. I mean, we leave a lot of time to be able to. I mean, that's my insistence. Well, it's a glorified holiday.
Yeah,
right.
With gigs in the way.
But we've always, when we've been places, tried to,
we're a social bunch. Yeah.
Around Europe, we've got to get in the art museums and
see life. I mean,
that band Art Brut. Do you know them?
Sure, yeah.
I made you do the tour, and it was great because Eddie Argos is the lead singer, and he described their first American tour where you just get completely hammered every night and then sleep all day in a hotel room, be poured into a van and go. And so now he's traveling around America, and he gets up at 7 a.m. and goes to museums,
right.
and go to all historical sites, and they ride bicycles, and it's like it's wonderful being an adult.
Yeah, priorities shift.
Yeah. I feel like I've become an adult now.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time.
Yeah.
Sally and Jon, I'm so touched to have spent time with you today. As you know, I'm still vibrating, but it's a good vibration. Thank you so much. I'm honored. Thank you. At the end of every episode, I tend to ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about. But today I want to do something a little different, if you'll indulge me. In the film Trances, the director, as I mentioned before, asked the members, well, if the band didn't exist, where would you be? And the band even turns it on the director. They're like, okay, well, this is kind of unfair. Like, what would you do if you weren't able to make film? Like what? And it's a really interesting discussion. But where would you both be if the Mekons hadn't existed?
Well, if it hadn't existed, I mean, I was already making music, and Jon was in the Three Johns as well. We were in other bands. To be honest, the
Three Johns was only because the Mekons existed.
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's only because I was there. If I hadn't gone to Leeds University in October 1976 and I'd gone to a different university, I imagine I would have been in some sort of punk band.
Yeah,
with some other people that might not have been as interesting as the people I was in. I was very lucky. Might have been in, I don't know. Maybe I'd have been in a really great punk band that made loads of money.
Maybe he'd be in U2.
And I would have.
There is an alternate universe.
By a bus in 1983 in Paris when I was getting my head together.
Right.
I mean, I think it's a general human thing that we have lost to make things. Now people just make things or they just consume things. But in the past, nearly everyone made things. People would make clothes. They would go into a shed and whittle wood or whatever. Even though they had regular jobs, there would be a making of things. And I think I've always been a maker, and I'm sure that aside from my day job, which I have, I'm one of the few people in the band who actually has just a day job. But everyone else does different things. So I think it's hard to know exactly what we would have done differently, but I think that I think I'd still be doing something creative as an adjunct to whatever I had to do. I definitely think that's the case. And we've put on plays. We did pantos in Chicago when we couldn't, it was the most labor intensive thing for no money I've ever done in my life. It was an act of insanity. And I wouldn't do it now. 5 years in a row, writing a script and putting a play together in a month that was just demented, and making all the costumes. But
Mutiny on the Beagle.
Yeah, but that at the time was an act of pleasure to get a community together. So I don't know if some of us just like that idea or it's just more open to us. But I think human beings love that, and we have been denied that. Maybe that explains a lot about why people just get involved in cults online, because it's a kind of negative expression of a human need to be with other human beings who are doing something. And so perhaps that is related. I don't know. But I think we would definitely be doing something, but maybe it wouldn't be the same. Maybe, maybe no one would be having us on their podcast.
If you take it back to punk rock, if you think punk rock was some sort of idea that Malcolm McLaren had, and then it wasn't. It was a sort of historical inevitability. Everything was building towards that moment. And people it was very diverse and very, very interesting and very freeing for a lot of people. Had very similar thoughts at the same time, a lot about culture and about politics and about the way the country was in Britain and the way it was obviously in America as well, all across Europe. People thought there was a need to do something different. It was a revolution. It was a cultural revolution. And I think whatever would have happened if wherever any of us had been, we would have still been massively influenced by that. And just because of the people we are, I mean, the details would be different, but, I have no doubt I would have been and also working out that this making culture purely for the acquisition of money is kind of sort of pretty worthless. Perverse, actually, and get the lessons we learned about. There are these old traditions. Getting back to trances, there are these old traditions that you can fall back on and see yourself part of a much, much broader history. I mean, we were getting compared to people in the English Civil War, the ranters and the levelers and people like that. That's what punk rock was, and to think then you can take these older traditions and other forms, other older folk music forms that might not necessarily be kind of like desperately radical, but then you can impose what you want on them as well. And it's interesting some of the best stuff we've done is when we've placed ourselves in the context or historical context and bent it to our own will. So,
oh my God, you guys make me so happy. Thank you so much. I really totally honored. Much love to you both. Thank you again. I can't wait
Thank you so much.
to see you again and to have another 9 records in my lifetime. Thank you.
Okay, cool. We'll try.
You're cursing us. Okay.
See you then.
later.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show's a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.